The film opens in 1983 in a small town in Idaho. Bruce Pierce and Gary Yarbrough lure a man named Walter West deep into the woods under the pretense of going on a hunting trip. Trusting his companions, Walter has no idea his life is about to change. Once isolated in the woods, one of the men shoots him from behind, killing him. Around the same time, a Jewish talk radio host and podcast personality named Alan Berg continues using his platform to ridicule and expose white supremacist groups and religious fanatics. His outspoken criticism infuriates members of the extremist movement, who begin paying close attention to everything he says. Meanwhile, veteran FBI agent Terry Husk transfers to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, reopening a long-abandoned FBI field office. After spending years investigating the Ku Klux Klan and organized crime, Terry hopes this quieter assignment will allow him to repair his fractured relationship with his estranged wife and daughter. Needing somewhere inexpensive to stay, he checks into a modest motel before taking in the peaceful surroundings of the small Idaho town. The tranquility is deceptive because beneath the surface, an organized network of violent extremists is preparing for war. Soon after arriving, Terry reviews files concerning Aryan Nations, a white supremacist organization led by Richard Butler. He introduces himself to the local sheriff's department, headed by Sheriff Laughlin, where he meets Deputy Jamie Bowen. Jamie quickly becomes Terry's closest ally and offers to introduce him to the community and explain the dangerous people operating nearby. At nearly the same time, Bob Matthews is already building something far more dangerous than a criminal gang. Though married to his wife Debbie and raising their young son Clinton, Bob is secretly having an affair with Zilla Craig, who is pregnant with his child. The robberies he organizes are not simply for personal wealth. Every dollar is being used to finance a growing militia dedicated to overthrowing the federal government and starting a race war. To strengthen his organization, Bob recruits military veteran Sam Stinson, promising him a generous monthly salary in exchange for training his followers and supplying them with increasingly powerful weapons. At the same time, Bob begins attracting new members from many different backgrounds. During recruitment meetings, he preaches that America is already at war and performs bizarre initiation ceremonies, even placing an infant at the center of one ritual as members pledge loyalty to one another and vow not to lay down their weapons until their enemies have been defeated. One of the recruits is Tony Torres, a troubled young man who believes immigrants ruined his life after losing his job and surviving a violent encounter during his youth. Bob exploits Tony's bitterness, convincing him to join the movement and eventually use his own identity to purchase firearms on behalf of the organization. Before long, Bob launches his first major operation. Alongside Bruce Pierce, Gary Yarbrough, and David Lane, he robs a Washington Mutual bank. The group storms inside, terrorizes employees, and forces the bank manager to open the vault while a teller is held hostage. As police arrive outside, one robber holds an officer at gunpoint while the others finish emptying the safe. They escape with bags full of cash, shooting out the responding police cruiser's tires before disappearing. Bob later visits Zilla, proudly handing her stacks of stolen money to support her pregnancy. Back at the sheriff's department, Terry discusses the robbery with Sheriff Laughlin, only to discover the sheriff has little interest in confronting the extremists responsible. Laughlin warns him that the cult is extremely dangerous and believes challenging them will only invite bloodshed. Terry refuses to accept that answer. Determined to investigate, he partners with Jamie, despite the risks. Jamie welcomes Terry into his home, introducing him to his wife Kimmy and their family. Over dinner, he explains that Bob Matthews and his followers have become local legends, spreading fear through robberies, intimidation, and mysterious disappearances. Jamie also reveals that Walter West vanished several weeks earlier after going into the woods with members of the extremist group. Walter had confided that the organization was printing counterfeit money and may have been responsible for a synagogue bombing, along with several robberies. Following leads provided by Walter's wife Bonnie Sue and his girlfriend, Terry and Jamie search the area where Walter was last seen, digging into disturbed earth with their bare hands. They uncover Walter's decomposing body buried in a shallow grave. The discovery transforms what seemed like isolated crimes into a homicide investigation directly connected to the extremist movement. Their search next leads them to Richard Butler's Aryan Nations compound. Butler openly admits that Bruce Pierce and Gary Yarbrough once belonged to his organization, but insists he expelled them after discovering they were abusing the group's printing press to manufacture counterfeit money. He distances himself from their increasingly violent actions and claims he has no control over the splinter faction Bob now leads. While leaving the compound, Terry notices copies of the Turner Diaries prominently displayed inside the church. Butler dismisses it as fiction that members study, but Terry immediately recognizes the same novel was found near Walter's murder scene. The book's repeated appearance suggests it is influencing the extremists' actions. Elsewhere, Bob continues expanding his operation. Hidden inside remote compounds, his followers print counterfeit currency, stockpile weapons, and prepare for increasingly ambitious attacks. Richard Butler privately confronts Bob, warning him that his reckless violence is drawing too much law enforcement attention and threatening everything Aryan Nations has built. Butler favors political influence and legal methods, but Bob rejects compromise. He argues that speeches and elections have failed, and that only violent revolution can achieve their goals. His message increasingly attracts followers away from Butler's organization. To ensure Terry notices the significance of the Turner Diaries, Butler has a copy anonymously delivered to Jamie's home. Jamie's wife informs him that someone simply dropped the book off and quickly drove away before anyone could identify them. Meanwhile, Terry reunites with fellow FBI agent Joanne Carney, an old colleague he trusts deeply. Joanne has been investigating related extremist activity and reveals that authorities recently recovered a failed bomb planted inside a pornography shop. Investigators believe the explosive was intended as a diversion while another crime occurred elsewhere. Bob soon perfects that strategy. Gary Yarbrough successfully bombs an adult theater, creating chaos that pulls nearly every available police officer toward the explosion. While law enforcement is distracted, Bob and his men ambush an armored truck carrying enormous amounts of cash. Terry arrives during the robbery and opens fire without waiting for backup, but the extremists vastly outnumber him and escape with the money. Jamie hesitates during the confrontation, freezing under pressure, leaving Terry furious over the missed opportunity. Later, Terry and Jamie try to unwind at a bar where Joanne angrily confronts Terry for repeatedly acting alone instead of coordinating with the FBI. She warns that his recklessness will eventually get someone killed. Seeking a moment away from the investigation, Terry goes hunting along a quiet riverside. Unknown to him, Bob is nearby. The two men strike up what appears to be an innocent conversation between strangers. Bob carefully studies Terry's personality and intelligence without revealing his own identity, while Terry unknowingly speaks face-to-face with the man he has been hunting. Terry and Jamie, meanwhile, continue studying the Turner Diaries. Jamie realizes the extremists are treating the novel not as fiction, but as an operational blueprint. According to the book, their movement follows 6 escalating stages: recruiting, fundraising, armed revolution, domestic terrorism, assassination, and finally, the day of the rope. Suddenly, many of the group's actions begin fitting together into a terrifying long-term strategy. The investigation becomes even more urgent when Alan Berg continues publicly attacking white supremacists over the airwaves, mocking their ideology and exposing their hypocrisy. Bob decides Berg must die. Bruce Pierce is sent to Denver to carry out the assassination, track him to his home. They confront him outside and shoot him dead, silencing one of their most outspoken critics. Joanne informs Terry about the assassination, convincing him that the extremist network is escalating exactly as the Turner Diaries predicted. Terry angrily confronts local authorities, warning that if they continue underestimating Bob's organization, the extremists will eventually dominate the region. Jamie further explains that intelligence suggests the group has already discussed poisoning municipal water supplies, committing more robberies, and eventually assassinating the president. Bob accelerates preparations for open conflict. He orders Gary and Tony to acquire even more firearms, using legal purchasers as cover while militia members continuously train with military weapons under Sam Stinson's instruction. Determined to finally identify his enemy, Terry visits Bob's estranged parents. They explain that Bob abandoned the family years ago and has completely severed ties with them. When Terry asks to see a photograph, he immediately realizes the man in the picture is the hunter he casually met beside the river. The realization haunts him because Bob had been studying him long before he knew who Bob was. As Bob's secret life grows increasingly complicated, Debbie discovers his affair with Zilla. Furious, she confronts him directly, but Bob calmly lies, denying everything, and swearing he has never been unfaithful despite the obvious evidence. Eventually, investigators discover one of Bob's hideouts along with his home address. They launch simultaneous raids, but Bob has already cleared out the hideout. At the same time, he is leading yet another armored truck robbery, this one yielding millions of dollars enough, Terry realizes, to finance an entire private army. Police finally catch up to the robbers during their escape, sparking another fierce gun battle. Bob's crew escapes once again, but in the confusion, Bob accidentally drops one of his guns. Investigators trace its registration to Tony Torres, who had purchased weapons for the group. Tony is arrested and, terrified by Terry's interrogation tactics, agrees to become an informant. Terry warns that if Tony fails to cooperate, his future will be over. Desperate to survive, Tony accepts the assignment and is sent back into Bob's organization wearing a wire while Joanne and FBI surveillance teams secretly monitor his movements. Bob remains suspicious when Tony returns, questioning how police released him so easily. Tony convinces Bob that he falsely claimed his firearm had been stolen long before the robbery, satisfying Bob enough to avoid immediate execution. Unable to wait any longer, Terry ignores orders once again. Spotting Bob, he pulls his gun and attempts to arrest him alone. Extremist gunmen immediately open fire, triggering another violent shootout. This time, Jamie overcomes his earlier hesitation, courageously providing covering fire while Joanne's team arrests several members of the organization, including Gary Yarbrough. Bob escapes on foot, prompting Terry and Jamie to pursue him. During the chase, Bob turns and shoots Jamie. Terry abandons the pursuit to save his friend, but Jamie's wound proves fatal. Surrounded by grieving officers, Terry helps deliver the heartbreaking news to Kimmy, who had feared from the very beginning that Terry's investigation would ultimately cost her husband his life. Among the evidence recovered after the failed arrest is Bob's wallet, which leads investigators directly back to Debbie. Realizing she has nothing left to protect, Debbie finally reveals Bob's hideout, though she warns Terry that her husband will never surrender alive. Bob retreats with Bruce Pierce and David Lane to a fortified safe house on Whidbey Island, Washington. There he prepares to officially declare war on the United States government and launch his largest terrorist attack yet. Federal agents and SWAT teams surround the property. Pierce and Lane attempt to flee but are immediately captured. Bob, however, refuses to surrender. Wearing a gas mask, he unleashes a devastating barrage of gunfire that repeatedly drives tactical teams back. With negotiations failing, authorities decide to set the house ablaze, hoping the fire will force Bob outside alive. Even as flames consume the building, Bob refuses every opportunity to surrender. Terry enters alone one final time, desperately trying to convince him that surrendering could spare his life and reduce his sentence. Bob rejects the offer completely, remaining fanatically loyal to his beliefs. Moments later, the growing fire reaches Bob's enormous cache of stored ammunition. Thousands of rounds begin exploding throughout the burning house, forcing Terry to retreat. Trapped inside yet unwilling to surrender, Bob Matthews dies in the inferno, choosing death over capture. After the smoke clears and the surviving members of the order are arrested, Terry returns once more to the quiet wilderness where he had once unknowingly met Bob. Standing alone with his thoughts, he reflects on the enormous cost of dismantling the extremist organization. Though the movement's leader is dead, Jamie is gone, innocent lives have been lost, and Terry is left regretting that he was never able to bring a man as fanatically devoted as Bob Matthews to justice alive.